I'm back. Let's get to page 4. At long last, the wolf has caught up with our team. Knowing that I'm going to be drawing this character from multiple angles, I thought it would be advantageous to have a 3D model of this mask. I could draw it all in perspective from hand, but I do find it helpful to build what is effectively a glorified cardboard mock-up to use as a reference. One of the advantages of figuring it out in 3D is that I have to really solve it. There are some things that look cool as a drawing and specifically look cool from one perspective, but to create a design that works from all views is a different story. And when fitting it onto a human, I had to modify it slightly to improve visibility. I'm not going for realistic, but I am going for believable. And while there may be some purists who are already looking at this mask and saying, that's not practical for a sword fighter. No, it's not. But really, looking at historical examples, pure practicality hasn't always been our biggest priority. But as long as his view is plausibly clear, that's enough. So for panel 1, our trio's conversation is rudely disrupted by the presence of the wolf. So I've said from the beginning that this series was going to be all about transparency. I'm effectively making all of the behind-the-scenes content first, showing where things work, where things don't, where I need to change course. So in that spirit, I'll be transparent. This was a particularly challenging video to speak to, because again, ideally the panels are kind of explaining themselves. Either they're selling the story or they're not. And the execution of them is what you've come to see in basically every video leading up to this point. Which, we're in the 80s now, by the way. Which, that's just crazy. But this page is all about build-up. To build up to the action that I'm anticipating drawing next, we need a bit of quiet. To get to the kinetic energy, we need to build up that potential energy. Like slowly pulling the elastic back before you release it. It's funny, I'll admit, there's a part of me that kind of wishes pages like this weren't necessary. But this is one of the great things about working on a sequential art project, is that the story forces you to draw stuff you wouldn't have chosen to draw otherwise. I want to get to a fight scene, and the temptation would be to leap right into it. But, and this is not new information, you all know this, without the build-up, without context, without stakes, no fight scene will ever be that interesting. Actually, a small side story. Years and years ago, Gladiator was on TV. I was watching his first arena fight. The censors had cut out most of the worst of the violence, but with it, they had also removed character context. The violence was a part of the storytelling, because you understood how the characters were starting to work together, and those who didn't work together were getting cut down. So the whole narrative of that battle was effectively lost. And so what the censors had created was a senseless montage of violence that had no story whatsoever. And it was far more jarring than it would have been if you saw a bit of blood and gore. So the shipwright can tell that this is a fight that only he can have. Bastion is awesome against monsters and bandits. This is clearly a fighter with a bit more finesse. In the face-off panel, I had some dialogue options, and I explored a bit of it, but ultimately I decided to cut all of it. I found all of it took away from just the quiet tension of this face-off. Just two experienced warriors sizing each other up. And lastly, another opportunity to showcase something about the character of the shipwright. Wherever possible, he'll try to make an appeal. He'll try not to kill, but he's been left with no choice countless times, and he hasn't lost a wink of sleep. By the way, I have to add the obligatory press all the YouTube buttons, share on social media, send a trailer in the group chat, sign up on Patreon, buy one of my books, and if you don't do any of that, at least go out there and support another project you believe in. For those of you who draw, and I'm sure this applies to all sorts of other categories as well, you've probably had this experience. You're working away, things are going great, and all of a sudden you realize that something that you're supposed to work on is particularly challenging. But you don't want to lose your momentum, so you do your best to fake it, and you know you're faking it, and the results are less than satisfying. I hate that feeling, and I was starting to feel it when it came to Drapery, and I was feeling it strongly enough that I decided it was time to stop and sharpen that particular axe. I collected a bunch of Drapery reference that was at least vaguely thematically appropriate to this project, and I tried to really take my time to break it down in a way that I could wrap my head around. The important thing with studies like this, I think, is not to copy. You're not copying. You're trying to understand it. So I really did my best to think through where the fabric was hanging, how it was twisting, how it was interacting with itself. Something to look out for coming up is that the first several versions of this character that I was drawing were done before the reference, and the last version was drawn after this exercise. So you tell me if my drapery looks like it has more confidence. It felt like it. And if it doesn't look like it, at least it felt like it. This is the price I pay for choosing to draw this kind of story. The more I tell the kinds of stories that I really love, the more I understand things like superhero tights. It would be wonderful to be able to just draw the anatomy layer and then just add a few design lines on top and call it a day. I get why they do that. In my setting, I can get away with a few people that are wearing a bit less, maybe have a few more tattoos featured, but that will have to be the odd case. You can bet I'll come back to exercises like this time and time again. Now, knowing that page 4 was going to be more challenging to talk about, I thought it would be nice to add a character design. While I was away, I didn't have a chance to set up a survey and get anything from my dragon patrons, but I've been wanting to design Methuselah for a long time, so I took this opportunity to try a first pass. This first version started as some figure reference, so I was getting a bit of practice in as well. I wanted to experiment with this shape. He was a bit more rectangular than the shipwright, and quite large, almost like an old grizzly bear with this big sheepskin coat. Generally, this is the costume design I like, but there was something about this design that didn't quite feel right. I wanted a more unified silhouette, something that would be even more recognizable from a distance. So I sketched up the idea again of this large rectangle, where the shipwright is effectively an hourglass. The primary text says that Methuselah reached the age of 969. He died very shortly before the flood. So at the time of this story, I'm not getting too specific about dates or timelines, but he's definitely in his 960s. Methuselah is the shipwright's grandfather. At his age and with his experience, I imagine he set aside the crown long ago, and he now occupies a position that's more like an advisor, but very much more like a priest. According to the numbers given in the text, during the shipwright's younger years, he would have had 6 living generations of forefathers. At the time of this story, Methuselah is the only one left, but he serves as a connection all the way back to Adam. According to genealogies, his first 300 years would have overlapped with Adam's last, so Methuselah acts as a connection between the beginning of the world and the end. Methuselah is almost a millennia old, but given the nature of this setting, I like the idea that he still has a lot of vitality in him. He has an extra 300 years on the shipwright, and while he's reached an age where he can afford a little bit of comfort to stay a little warmer in his sheepskin robes, he can still be quite dangerous. While the shipwright is a formidable fighter, I like the idea that Methuselah may be able to completely shut a man down with a touch. So while I was mostly happy with this version, he still wasn't quite Methuselah enough. I made one last attempt at my first pass. I picture him being very large. He's old, but again, formidable. I like the idea that even somewhat hunched over from age, he still stands about a head taller than the shipwright. I think this subtle pose change helps a lot. He's been around, and while he's still vital, time is still taking its toll. A quick note on the square armor pieces I keep drawing. Again, I was thinking of him occupying the role of priest for the family. His armor is armor, but it's a little more on the ceremonial side. And I like the idea of designing something that was like the proto-version of priestly garments. So where the old tabernacle priestly robes had an ephod with 12 stones in it representing the 12 tribes, this version of the ephod has 1 stone for 1 tribe. In all the previous versions of this character, I had been drawing him without the beard, but on coming back to him, I just think he really needs that beard. It's one of the most potent ways of communicating that he is very, very, very old. He is the most old. Also, I gave him those eyebrows, partly because my own eyebrows are desperate to go crazy as well. The older I get, the farther out they're going to go. My own destiny may be to one day resemble a great horned owl, so as a personal joke at my own expense, I gave him those eyebrows. He wears the century bracelets, but being over 900 years old, he gets to wear them on both arms, because that's just one of the rarest things you'll ever find. By the way, I kind of picture a system where if you're 500, you can wear 5 of them on either arm. You can wear them on both arms, but it's kind of understood that that just means 5, not 10. So I also gave him an old flint sword. I like the idea that this is an artifact that comes from the dawn of creation, but it served him well. He's used it well. and he doesn't see the point in having anything new made. Also, his staff is a shepherd's crook, being a former king, now the high priest of the Shepherd's Valley. It seems to be the ideal tool. So here it is, a first pass at Methuselah, ancient high priest of the Shepherd's Valley, last living forefather of the shipwright, and the connection between the beginning of the world and the end. Thanks for watching.